Welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
You're in it to win it, right?
If you've tuned into this episode, you've just won the opportunity of a lifetime.
Yes. Atonement theories.
Yes. So episode 50.
Level 3.
Yeah. So we did an Atonement Theories episode for episode 50 of our podcast. That was one of our highest.
It was one of our most watched.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend, as an intro to this even, go back and watch that. 3 atonement theories in that one.
Yep. We just very briefly cover 3 different ways people have summarized the atonement. And then last week on Thursday.
Which are not the only 3.
It's not the only 3.
But those are 3 ones we picked.
Yeah. 3 good ones, or at least common-ish ones.
Yeah, ones that you may have heard of and not even realized the names of, or maybe know pieces of but had never felt them.
Or just thought it was a random idea and didn't know it had anything to do with the atonement. But then last week, episode 68,
Yeah,
that sounds right.
Sounds right.
Last week on Thursday, we did Atonement Part 2, Penal Substitutionary Atonement Theory Part 1.
Yep.
That's confusing. Basically, we started digging into, through the podcast, the main atonement theory that a lot of us born and raised in the Midwest, which you weren't born and raised in the Midwest, but you had an Ozark lineage, which means you were born and raised in the Midwest.
I don't like to admit it, but I've actually
like
lived the longest now in the Midwest of anywhere I've ever lived. It's just not what I grew up with.
If you're too ashamed of that, we'll bleep that entire sentence out. Boop, the Midwest.
But part of why I think this is because even in Oregon, which I would claim is kind of the place where my foundations were planted for Christianity and faith, that was the Velcro or whatever you want to say, wall of flannel graph of Christ died for your debt and paid it, so now you get to go free.
So that's what we talked about last week. I think episode 68. It is called The Atonement Part 2, Thinking Legally.
Yeah.
And it was us two and John Coward, who's a lawyer and an elder at our church, talking about that idea.
Yep.
So that's part of the penal substitutionary atonement
And just
theory.
to whet your appetite, one of the cool questions in there is, we would never think a financial price can be paid for certain sins. So, for example,
certain crimes in a court.
Crimes. So the idea behind that one was to say, like, if someone commits murder, we would never say it's okay for them just to pay $10 million or a set amount. That there actually has to be some sort of punishment
that happens to them
that goes beyond money.
Yeah. We were just trying to decide or help figure out, was Jesus' atoning death a civil debt covering thing? Because if the victim needs $8 million to get their $8 million back, anybody can pay that $8 million.
Yeah.
Or is it a punishment that needs to be transferred?
Then you can't substitute because it doesn't work the same way.
Just trying to dig into that.
And that's really healthy. And if some of you are like, wow, I don't, that doesn't sound right, then how can Jesus pay if we were the ones that deserve to be punished? So go back and listen.
Go back and listen.
Start the conversation there, because we're going to finish the conversation here.
If you haven't seen it, go back and listen. Hit pause right now and go back and listen. The AC's on.
Good job.
Okay, now that we have all those people out of our hair, now I can remind you what I said at the end.
Yep.
Which is that if the debt was blood,
then it changes
then blood
everything.
could be paid for that. Which leads us to what we're talking about this week, part 2 of our penal substitutionary atonement talk, part 3 of our atonement episodes, part 70 of our
welcome
total
to the discussion.
Yeah.
Welcome to the discussion. So let's set this up today. I love that concept where if the debt was no longer a punitary thing of financial,
if it was no longer money,
so it was a punitary thing that was defined by blood or defined by a life force. Might even be more of like the healthier terminology, to be like the life force of whatever creature, animal, human, like that is the ultimate cost. So we would define that as like the death penalty. Yeah. Right? Like that would be like the cost of this would be your life force. Your death is the cost of your crime. Yeah. So that's where we're starting the discussion today. And this discussion doesn't start at the cross.
No.
Yeah.
So we were created, every sermon ever goes back to Genesis 1. So why not us too?
Let's do it.
We were created in God's image to be in community with him. That's what the garden was. It's us and God hanging out. We're doing our stuff. We're chilling. We're living our life. We're in charge of the garden. But we miss our daily walk in the cool of the day with God when we sinned.
Yep.
And our sin separates us from God, separates us from where God is, and God's right next to the tree of life that he gives us.
And
we're separating ourselves
our
from
life force now has an end day.
Yeah. I got to sneeze.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's almost...
Don't sneeze.
Going away.
Good.
Yep. I'm obedient. So this sin debt idea, you really see first in the garden.
Yeah.
They eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which we'll go into in a second. And God gets upset about that. They've now broken a law. That was honestly the only rule.
There's one rule.
Don't do that. And I've heard some people try to spin it. Specifically, I've heard some people try to spin it, where it's like you can either have life, the tree of life that the one God wants you to eat from, or you can have the tree of knowing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a great way to understand it. If it's like God wanted to keep us dumb, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because Jesus spoke in mysteries and wanted you to, in parables, and wanted you to understand them. That takes some brain power. If God's whole will is for you to be dumb, then no. So Tim Mackey helps define this a different way. That it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or the tree of determining good and evil. When we ate from that, we were saying, God, you're not the perfect judge of good and evil. We think we could do a better job.
Ooh.
We want to define good and evil for ourselves, which defining good and evil is the thing a judge or a king does.
And also, I think Shane Wood adds some even more depth to that with his book Between Two Trees, and then having that discussion, which if you haven't watched and gone back and watched that with Shane Wood, you should.
Yes.
His atonement theory is in there as well. But he talks about even that tree, there might have been a need for a longer period of basically relationship before that tree could even be introduced, possibly. And so he even he puts it out as a hypothesis that maybe it was a rushed into thing where maybe along the way God would have invited them into taking part of that and seeing some of this, but they didn't wait. Similar to how like a child is not ready to drive a car, or like a woman at 12 maybe doesn't have the same understandings of where babies come from as a mom about to have one, or a mom of 3. So like there's this understanding that maybe it's not necessarily even all of the harshness of what it is, but it's also the timing. We rushed ahead. Adam and Eve rushed ahead.
It's the big point is that we were selfish. We'll never know if what you said is true or not, if there was a point where we could get to there or whatever. But we rushed ahead out of selfishness. So some people who are antagonistic to this story will be like, they just wanted to expand their minds. And God lied about them saying they would surely die because they didn't die then.
Yep.
And all that's like missing the point. Satan, the tempter, well, we think it's Satan, the accuser, the whatever, the snake in the garden, who's tempting them, said, you'll be like God, which is tough because they were already like God. They were made in his image, so they already looked like him. They were already in community with God, just like he was with himself. What were they missing?
Equal standing.
Like power.
Yep.
So out of total selfishness,
rushing ahead,
trying to dethrone God or set up another throne out of what we could make, just like right next to his. It's like, yep, we're the same. Yep. We did that. And that was breaking the one rule God had. Another way Tim Mackey from the Bible Project frames this is we define good and evil for ourselves. So God says that's wrong.
And that's throughout the Old Testament.
But we say that's right in my own eyes.
Yep.
For me to eat that fruit.
Ooh. And whenever I'm probably jumping ahead here with you, but I see that as such a true statement because when the judges or any of the prophets come or they turn from the leaders of the spiritual side of Israel, it almost has this like refrain in the Old Testament where it's like, and they turned from, or they forgot Joseph and his family, and each man did what he was right in his own eyes.
Yeah.
It said that over and over and over in the Old Testament.
And that's just the tree of the knowledge of good and evil talking.
Yeah,
saying
Tower of Babel. I mean,
me
you see
redefining good and evil for myself again. It's think like sinful, selfish impulsiveness.
Yeah.
When Cain killed Abel, he didn't like that Abel had more favor with God. He didn't like Abel in general.
Mm-hmm.
Why was he able to do stuff that God liked and he couldn't? And so what was right in his own eyes was to take out the competition.
Yeah.
What was right in God's eyes was don't kill your brother.
Dude.
And so all of sin, at least the way I'm going to paint it today, looks like that. We're doing what's right in our own eyes. We're being unsubmissive to God and submissive to our whims.
Yeah.
Whatever we want. That's selfishness. And so God, after hundreds and thousands of years and doing different things to try to bring humanity back to him, this is Noah and the flood. I'm going to restart humanity because it got bad so that we can be like we were in the garden again. God set up, after he delivered the Israelites in Exodus from enslavement to the Egyptians, and then that's Moses, the 10 Commandments.
The tabernacle.
The tabernacle. He set up a new place, a new Garden of Eden, but with a lot more restrictions. It was, he no longer trusted that you would submit to him. You kind of had to prove that you would submit to him. So that's the Old Testament sacrificial system. What a lot of people get wrong, we just watched season 1, episode 8, which is actually coming out next Tuesday based on this episode. But I'm going to give you a spoiler. A guy named Shmuel, a rabbi, a Pharisee, says the law is God.
Yeah.
The Torah, the first 5 books that we're trying to teach and like be righteous with, that is God.
And it's such a powerful image because when he says that, basically what he's saying is the laws are the best description of God we have.
Yeah.
Rather than seeing a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
Being the best description.
So a lot of
the
people,
God we have.
the Pharisees of that day, of Jesus' day, were like, we need to follow the law so God won't be mad at us. We need to follow the law so God will bless us. Almost like a magician, a sorcerer.
Yeah.
I need to do this
bottle.
incantation right so I can get what I want.
Yep.
So I can avoid punishment, so I can get blessing. But the 10 Commandments that set up, and all the commandments after that, Leviticus and all that, set up how to be in relationship with God.
Yeah.
How to get back to the garden again. Our walk in the cool of the day with God.
The goal was to get back to the relationship, not to do it to earn it.
Yeah.
To earn this like magical like trust slash
He's not the genie
gift.
from Aladdin.
No. So in some ways they're treating this law and then they're using what officially is set up in the tabernacle and then the sacrificial system as a mathematical equation to earn right standing, right?
Yeah.
Or in righteousness.
That's how it turned out to be. But I think in the beginning it was a lot more earnest, a lot more honest.
Absolutely.
So the idea of the sacrificial system is we're right with God and then we mess up. We sacrifice our relationship with God to get what we want, to redefine good and evil for ourselves, to do what's right in our own eyes.
So let's back up here and let's define this real quick. So I want to, because I know I want to get to this. So here's what I want you to do, because you can do this right now, and I think this is going to be the most beneficial thing. I've grown up in the church my whole life.
Yes.
I've been around the church my whole life. I have heard of certain feasts and things that are done in the Jewish understanding, but I know at the temple tabernacle that there was certain things that had to be done by a obedient Jew, like an obedient follower of the Jewish understanding, the Torah. This is what we need to do. Help me understand what that actually looked like to sacrifice some of these things. Like, what were the points? How did they, what did this physically look like?
Yeah.
To do that. Do you have like an understanding of that?
I'm going to get there.
I don't know if I've ever had that all in one place explained to me. And if you have that info, I think it'd be helpful for all of us to kind of start there.
That's the next thing I'm going to say after I say this one thing.
Yeah.
Which is that you're good with God. You mess up. You sacrifice your relationship with God to get what you want.
Yeah.
You're selfish. You do the fruit from the tree again.
Yeah.
God has set up this system to where you sacrifice your selfishness. You give up something of yours to get relationship with God again.
So you go the opposite of what got you in trouble to get you out of trouble.
Yes, basically.
So selfishness got you in, unselfishness or sacrifice gets you
That's
out.
very general.
I'm just trying to simplify.
But
I'm just trying to simplify.
Yeah.
And I know there's more to that, and we can unpack that. But at the simplest level, I see why that makes sense.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of different kinds of sacrifices. But before I get into that, just know I'm going to simplify this to where it's sacrificial atonement, not there's like grain offerings and different things you can do.
Okay.
This is just the
Tithing,
I need to be right with God again
Mm-hmm.
kind of sacrifices. So there are 6 stages that a guy named Leon Morris in a book called The Atonement sets out on what a sacrificial atonement kind of thing at the temple would look like.
So if I'm a Jew and I'm trying to get right with God, these are the 6 levels.
Yep.
Okay.
Level 1. Well, not level. Step 1.
Step 1.
Step 1.
These are 6 steps. Better.
Leon Morris calls it the bringing near. This sounds really obvious. It's like step 1 of a church service.
You bring
drive
flowers
to the church.
Okay, drive to the church. There you go.
That's what it seems like. But
okay.
His point with that is that the worshiper draws near with the intention of worshiping and becoming clean before God, and they draw near with an animal that was of an acceptable kind and ceremonially clean and unblemished, a perfect one of its kind. So they are drawing near with their thing they're going to sacrifice.
With something that is worth value.
Yeah. And it's got to be a good thing. So they always say if you're sacrificing a lamb or any animal, it's got to be spotless, unblemished, kind of like what would you get the most money for in the market?
Yes, that's what I was going to say. It's not necessarily, it is symbolically important for the unblemished, but more about it's like you're saying, it's a selfless, a generous gift.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's got to be something worth something because sacrifice can't not hurt.
That's the David thing. I will not give what does not cost me.
Yeah.
When he's offered that. There you go. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Step 2, the laying on of hands.
Ooh.
So you bring your animal in. This is probably even more for like 4-legged animals and not like birds or whatever.
Yeah.
But any animal, whatever you're doing, the laying on of hands. So the owner firmly laid hands on his animal, identifying himself with the sacrifice. This is my animal.
Oh gosh.
So I wrote a sermon about this. I haven't preached yet, but hopefully I will someday, where I talk about how I didn't grow up hunting. I grew up in the city. Mm-hmm. But with hunting, when you're like trying to get your kid, I've been hunting, but I've never successfully shot anything.
Yeah.
When your kids are hunting for the first time and they shoot something for the first time, you've tried to desensitize them up to that point to like the blood and the lifeless look in the animal's eyes and the whatever. You're trying to help them not be affected by it. And that happens the first time and they're freaked a little bit, but the more they're around it, they get desensitized. They grow up. Hunting's easy.
Yeah.
This is the opposite. You are laying your hands on the sacrifice. You're saying, this is my sacrifice. I see myself in this. This is my selfishness. I'm watching my selfishness.
So you're bringing the sensitivity. You're bringing the significance.
You're resensitizing yourself.
Yeah. Wow.
You're identifying with this thing. Some believe that this confession of sins. Some believe that the confession of sins, while hands are laid on the animal, transferred guilt. This isn't necessarily for sure thing, but it's a totally plausible thing. That you're like looking at your guilt for what you've done transferred to your animal as you're talking about what it represents.
So some think it's symbolic, some think it's more literal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Either way, I think it has deep power in that. Holy smokes.
Yeah. So then you bring your animal up, you laid your hands on, and you kind of identify your animal with you and with what you've done wrong. Then there's the killing of the animal. Hebrews 9:22 says this, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins.
Ooh.
So you had to kill your own animal. Usually it was like slitting the throat with a knife. Did I say that right? Yep.
Yeah.
Unless it was too small to be killed and then have its blood manipulated, the owner would kill it. So if it was like the rest of the sacrificial process is taking the blood and doing stuff with it. And that was the priest's job. If there was not enough blood, like if it was like a dove or something, the priest might do it. But otherwise, the owner did it. He did everything up to this point.
Wow.
So then step 4 is the manipulation of blood. So this is where the priest steps in and takes over. So if it's most types of offerings, I'll get into what the kinds are later. The blood would be sprinkled against the altar, this like burning campfire thing.
Yep, representing God's presence.
Yep.
Okay. Or representing God's judgment.
It's the finality of your sacrifice of that thing. I'm offering this to God. Once it's on the altar, it's on fire, and I cannot get it back.
Okay.
It is God's now.
Finality of the sacrifice.
Yep.
Okay.
So that was burning. You at some point put the body of the animals during certain sacrifices on that. But then the priest would take the blood for most sacrifices and sprinkle it against the altar on all sides.
Okay.
But if it was specifically a sin offering, it would be sprinkled 7 times on the curtain to the Holy of Holies, placed on the horns of the altar of incense, a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, and seven just is fullness, completeness. That's why in Hebrew.
Yeah,
and
the same way that the number 13 for us is unlucky.
Yeah,
and a lot of hotels and skyscrapers will not have a 13th floor.
Yep.
That kind of power and meaning. 7 for them was completeness.
Yeah,
I did it 7 times, therefore I completely did it.
Yeah,
yeah,
and you see that in the creation story itself, 7 days.
So they do the blood first, and then step 5 is the burning on the altar. So they finally actually take the parts of the animal they're giving to God, and they burn it on the altar.
Yep.
Now, these priests are doing this all day, and they're not earning money for it. So sometimes during certain sacrifices, certain kinds,
they get to keep a portion.
They get to keep a part,
Yep.
so that they got something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they can feed their family or their whatever. And then point 6 is the disposal of the rest of the carcass. I'm going to go over all these points again later once I talk about what the kinds are.
Okay.
But so that's kind of the process. You are there. You identify with your sacrifice. You kill it. And then the priest does all the holy stuff.
So this is where we start to go, okay, so this has been ingrained since the tabernacle. So the tabernacle is after they get out of Egypt, they're marching towards the promised land. They're carrying this thing that breaks down because it's a tent and canvas that has like a surrounding piece. But it begins to be like deeply ingrained in their culture and deeply a part of their
This is
ritual.
a daily thing.
Yes.
The altar of incense is never quenched. It's always on fire, even if it's moving.
So when do and how often do they sacrifice like this? Is this a weekly thing, a monthly thing? Is this like when they feel like they need it?
The temple and the priests are daily sacrificing things just to kind of keep up relations.
Okay.
And then the people are regularly sacrificing things, especially at their 7 yearly holy days, which is where we get holidays.
Yeah.
If you didn't know that. And then they're also situationally sacrificing when like certain sins and certain things come up that they feel like they need to atone for.
Okay.
One of those 7 things in the year, 7 holy days, is the Day of Atonement, the day where the high priest... I'm going to get to this. I'm going to finish this thought and then come back to the kinds of, like 4 basic kinds of sacrifices. But that's like the culmination of their sacrifices for the year. Like, did we miss anything?
When does that day occur? Do you know? Is like Passover? Is it around? I don't remember either. I
think it's Yom Kippur. That's the
right.
same.
That sounds right.
I think so.
Well, and that day is the day where they take the lamb, right? And and they sacrifice it for the entire nation. Is that right? And it's the pure lamb?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
So before we get to that, there are 4 basic kinds of sacrifices / offerings you can do. And they go like
combo
this.
number 1, combo number 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Supersize animal style.
Okay, good. I'm just trying to make this relatable. Animal style. Oh my gosh.
Okay. So there's a burnt offering.
Okay.
That means an offering to consecrate or make sacred an individual to God.
Okay.
So how did I summarize this in the other one? There's one to overcome an obstacle.
Yep.
And there's one to bless the relationship.
Ooh, okay.
And there's a kind between us and God and a kind between us and others. So the burnt offering is, I'm going to go from a neutral to a good relationship with God. I'm not a blank slate, but I'm showing that I like him and I want to be in relationship with him. The one for us to others is called the peace offering.
Okay.
I have a neutral offering or a neutral standing with them, but I want to have a good standing with them. So I do a peace offering.
Okay.
To help God bless my relationship with this other party.
Friend, business partner. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
There's the sin offering.
I messed up.
I messed up against God, and I want to go from a bad relationship to a neutral relationship. So I offer a sin offering.
So this just brings us back to even.
Yep.
This is an extra.
And that's me to God.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a guilt offering.
Ooh.
I have a bad relationship with other people, and I want to go to a neutral relationship with other people. You see how that works?
Yeah.
So if I'm bad and I want to go to good with other people, I go guilt offering. Sorry, I messed up. I really did you wrong. Guilt offering to help God bless that relationship or overcome that obstacle with me and them. And then I do a peace offering.
Yeah.
Let's have peace between us. I want to live and thrive with you.
Yeah. That's cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're coming in. It's maybe not just one, but multiple sometimes, or at least in steps to try to make.
Yeah.
Okay. In a relationship.
So those are the kinds of offerings that you can offer. Basically, there's more. There's grain offerings.
Yeah, but that's
whatever.
That's healthy for us to kind of have a foundation for some things.
Yeah. So when I got kind of tripped up on points 4 through 6, of what the sacrifice looks like. It's because it starts splitting up between what kind of offering you're doing, sacrifice you're doing.
So after you've brought this blemish thing, after you've put and confessed whatever the relationship,
and after you've killed it,
slit the throat or killed it,
what the priest does is different
according to those 4 things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, what you brought to the temple, like what thing you brought to sacrifice, is determined by how bad you messed up for the bad to neutral offerings,
depending on
or how much you want to bless it for the neutral to good offerings.
So that's why when you see like David or Saul David, I think when he brought the ark back, is like 12 steps, and he's like killing 12 oxen or something.
Yeah, he's like, God, I'm so sorry. I want to be good with you.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
that's in 2 Samuel, by the way.
So, so the manipulation of blood. You've killed the animal. The priest is now going to manipulate the blood. If the offering was anything other than a sin offering, which is I messed up to God.
To God, okay.
And I want to go from bad to neutral. If it's anything other than that, burnt, peace, or guilt offering, you just sprinkle the blood against the altar on all sides. If it's a sin offering, you're doing a lot.
You're doing the curtain.
That's where goes the Holy of Holies. So let me back up one more time and say one more thing that'll help make all this make sense.
Yeah.
So the Israelites were on the move. They were in tents. And the tabernacle was the mobile temple. It was the temple tent.
Yeah.
Tabernacle means tent. So tabernacle was God's tent in the middle of all their tents.
Yep.
God was actually with them like the Garden of Eden. This is God's presence where he lives. So there's the outside of his tent where everybody else is. There's his courtyard, his front yard of his tent where he lives. There's the holy place, kind of the dining room of his tent, where it's his dining room. That's where he hangs out with people. And then there's the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle. That's his bedroom. That's where he's living. That's where he goes to sleep if it was a regular tent and he was a regular dude.
Yeah.
But he's God. So when it's a sin offering, I'm messed up against God. I want to go from bad to neutral.
Yep.
They sprinkle the blood 7 times on the curtain to the Holy of Holies, the curtain to God's bedroom.
This separates the kind of dining room to the bedroom.
The most vulnerable place, the most intimate place. This is where God actually lives. We're going to get as close as we can and sprinkle the blood saying, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. 7 times.
So it's there. It's on the horns of the altar of incense. Rest port at the base of the altar for burnt offerings. Yeah. So it was a lot of places because it's God's house, the tabernacle. Every part of it is God's
So it's
house.
an intentional thing to kind of show that they're trying to create that relationship again.
Yeah.
They're trying to move, and that blood is what's symbolically moving that relationship to neutral.
If God doesn't answer the front door when you knock, but the front door looks open, you're walking in and trying to find him to say sorry.
Yep.
That's why
that's what they're doing.
Okay. So then the burning on the altar, that's step 5. So in burnt offerings, the entire animal was burnt. So burnt offerings were...
So the priests don't get any of that?
No.
No,
the
they don't
entire animal is burnt in the burnt offering. The burnt offering, if you forgot, is the one to consecrate or make sacred, the neutral to good with God.
Yeah.
God, you're getting this whole animal.
Yeah, not taking any of that.
None of us are getting nothing. You're getting this whole thing. And then in sin, guilt, and peace, all the other kinds of offerings, the priest would get a portion of that. Okay, the disposal of the rest of the carcass. Yeah. Burnt offering, already totally destroyed. Yeah. Nothing left to do.
Nothing left.
That's trying to get good with God. He got the whole thing.
Yep.
Sin and guilt offerings. That's all of the bad to neutral, either you to God or you to other people. The high priest got some of the flesh, the meat, little bits of it, like a leg or something, I don't know. And then they'd burn the rest of it. Here's the cool part. Peace offerings.
Yeah.
Peace offerings is you trying to go from neutral to good with other people.
Yeah.
So in the peace offering, pretty much most of that animal, priest gets a little bit of it like normal, and the rest of it is one big potluck for you and the people you're trying to make peace with. So you sit down with the priest, but then with some of the other people, you and the other party that you're trying to be good with, and you have a meal and you eat together, which is like, as you know from Jesus' table ministry, he's eaten with tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners, and that's showing how good of a relationship they have. So
that peace thing is pretty cool. So that's symbolic that it doesn't stay there. It actually goes into the relationship.
Yes.
That's really neat.
So here we go. Here's how all of this matters.
So why?
Well, do you have any questions?
No. This is so healthy. So when I said it doesn't start at the cross at the very beginning, this is why we couldn't start there. Is because if we start to talk about the atonement theory of
why
blood,
Jesus have to die?
Of blood.
Yeah.
And you say that without knowing this, because I did not grow up Jewish, nor did I know this
Me
stuff.
either.
And I've been in Bible college, and I've learned some of this, but I've never really sat down and gone, oh, this is what's going on.
Yeah. This is a very simplified way to understand it. But
this Jesus sacrifice is going from bad to good with God. Is that right? Or bad to neutral with God? What is this Jesus sacrifice on the cross?
That's such a softball setup question. Thank you so much. It's all of these.
Oh.
So Jesus' sacrifice initiated the kingdom of God. We were apart from God. Think Ephesians 1 and 2.
Yeah.
We were distant from God, but God sacrificed his only son.
Yeah.
Was his sacrifice a sin offering, bad to neutral with God? Yes. We sinned. We transferred our guilt to Jesus every time we confess to him, every time we trust in him.
Yeah.
We transfer our guilt onto the sin offering that is Jesus, and he is destroyed. Is it a burnt offering, consecrating us to God? Yes. The whole offering is destroyed, and we are made right with God as our guilt has gone away, and that offering, Jesus, his righteousness comes to us to make us in right standing with God, not neutral standing.
Yeah.
But like in a positive way, he adopts us as sons and daughters. So we have been consecrated, been made sacred. Like 1 Peter, we're a kingdom of priests to God.
Dude, this is so cool. I knew this was going to be good, and you were excited to teach this.
I'm stoked about this.
This is one of the coolest ways to understand the fullness of the kingdom of God.
Yeah. Now,
because there's two other sacrifices
that are
freaking awesome.
So that's all the stuff with God,
which is where we normally stop.
Yeah, we
with
say
this atonement.
God saved me and me only, and also a lot of other a lot of other individuals.
And we're better now.
But God is making a kingdom. And it's not just him and Trinity and one of us.
In the Matrix.
There is also the guilt offering if we've sinned against somebody else.
Yeah.
By Jesus' death, we've been forgiven for what we've done to others or neglected to do for others.
Yep.
All these kinds of things. And our offenses against each other, we still need to say sorry to each other. But our offenses against each other, not just against God, but each other, have been covered over by Jesus' sacrifice. And it crosses barriers.
Yep.
So there's no longer Jew or Gentile. There's no longer male or female, slave or free.
Yep.
Because Jesus was the guilt
Romans,
offering.
by the way.
Yeah. But he's also the peace offering.
Yeah.
So the guilt is bad to neutral with others. Peace is neutral to good with others. Jesus was our peace offering, to where we can enjoy when Revelation 7 and 14, the crowds of people in heaven are from every nation, every tongue. All these disputes have been settled, and we're in good relationship with each other.
No more tears, no more pain.
Look at, again, Jesus' table ministry with other people.
Look no further than communion, my friend.
Yeah. Everybody comes there. So communion's a good example. Communion that we celebrate every week is our peace offering with others and with God. We are coming to the end of the sacrifice. The priest, Jesus, has manipulated the blood and distributed the body of the sacrifice, Jesus, to cover over all these things. And now we're enjoying a meal, Jesus, with a party other than us that we want to be in peace with, others and Jesus.
Dude, this is so cool, man.
I know, right?
So let me just lay this out in case you got a little lost in minutia, because if you've been paying attention to this, I legitimately didn't know all this stuff when we were going to it. We kind of play this that way because I kind of get to be in some way you as the listener, as Ryan's kind of laying out this info that he's worked very hard to put together. So think about just those 4 levels of getting right with God if you've made a mistake, moving your relationship into a great place with God, making peace with someone that you've messed up with, moving your relationship to a great place with somebody else. Yeah. That is exactly what's happening on the cross in one moment. Yeah. He is taking away our sins and also putting us in right standing with God. He is removing our guilt from others and putting us in a place to love others well and be loved by them well in one quick sacrifice.
That's why Jesus didn't want to stop what was happening. Like, we're going to talk about this. Either we did or we're going to, I don't know when this episode's coming out. Yeah. But somewhere in our Gospel of John series, as we're talking about Jesus' sacrifice and crucifixion, we're talking about how he did not want to stop what was happening.
No.
And that's one other thing I want to tackle today. I know
you're doing great. And I will say this. If you didn't understand that and you got a question or something, throw it in here. We want to explain this more. But comment. This is such a healthy thing for you to realize that this was intentionally set up in a sacrificial way of atonement, that Jewish people, a.k.a. the epistles, comment on this constantly. The writer of Hebrews, Paul, he is always, they are saying what they grew up in, the systems they grew up in. Jesus is the full sacrifice. He paid it all. And when they say that, they're not just thinking about money. Yeah. They're thinking about the sacrificial
They're thinking
system.
about guilt. They're thinking about sin. They're thinking about consecration. Are we neutral or profane?
And they're thinking about relationship with others as much as God. They're thinking all of this stuff is what's allowing Jew and Gentile to get along. It's what's allowing people that don't look like, aren't the same, to have unity and peace because of this sacrifice. It's powerful, man. It's a powerful way to understand what's going on.
The last thing I want to say is when I was putting this stuff together, thank you, Mark Scott, for making me do this paper in Doctrine of Christ.
Love Mark Scott.
He's the greatest.
OCC.
When I was putting this paper together, I saw a tweet from Michael Gungor. This is 2017.
Yeah.
Here was his gripe with how to understand Jesus, what he did through a sacrifice through his death. Michael Gungor said, "I would love to hear more artists who sing to God and fewer who include a father murdering a son in that endeavor." And then later he said, "Now I certainly don't mean to minimize the meaning and symbolism of the cross for billions of Christians throughout the centuries. I simply think blood sacrifice is a very limited and less than timely metaphor for what the cross can mean in our culture." So pretty much this is the divine child abuse argument.
Yeah.
God couldn't just be happy with us. He had to kill his own son. Mm-hmm. Who would we be happy with who killed his own son?
Yeah.
That's a really tough thing to handle, and that's a pretty good argument. Except for God didn't kill his own son.
He laid his life down.
Jesus offered himself. Mm-hmm. So Jesus is the sacrifice. Mm-hmm. He's the spotless, blameless, pure sacrifice who never sinned. He's also the high priest who sacrificed it.
Mm-hmm. Played both roles.
Yeah. If he had this happen to him unwillingly, maybe there'd be something to argue with. Mm-hmm. But he's like the Iron Giant at the end of his movie. Mm-hmm. He's like every war hero at the end of their movie where they're like, one last thing. Mm-hmm. They run in the room with the grenade or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They jump. He voluntarily did this. There was no God forcing his will. Now, Jesus didn't want to do it. He doesn't love pain and being hurt, as you can see in, I think, John 17 and maybe some other Garden of Gethsemane passages. Father, take this cup away from me.
That's what love calls you to do.
Yeah.
It's the same way when a parent sacrifices to love their child, or in a marriage, you sacrifice to love your spouse, or in a friendship, you sacrifice to love a friend. Yeah. It doesn't mean that it's ideal for you or it's best for you, but it's best for the relationship.
It's a sacrifice because it hurt you, but you'd much rather bless somebody else through being hurt than not be hurt.
And let me just wrap this all up because this is so cool.
Yeah.
And I know this is a part of this, but what you said earlier about the simplicity of a selfish choice is unwritten by a selfless one.
Yeah.
In the garden. And that's ultimately what you just said, is that this was a selfless act by a selfless act of love, which was the exact opposite of what the garden choice was. And so in the fullness of even more than the tabernacle, it is underwriting this by the fullness of the choice, that he's laying it down inside this system to create fullness with God and others.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Man, I really enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to doing more. I know that we're talking through even a couple others, and we are going to try to get Shane Wood back on here at some point.
Yeah.
And to do more. I'd love to break down the union theory with him. Oh, that would be so much fun.
Yeah.
But anywho, thank you so much for watching. We need your Q&A questions. We're still
please
piling those up. We are taking a break for a week or two from
Just the Chosen.
Just the Chosen. We are finishing season, I think, this next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Season 1 is the finale. It'll be episode 8. But then after that, we'll take a break. This next week will be the conclusion of that. We'll have 1 or 2 weeks possibly off, and then we'll start season 2.
Yep.
Man, this has been a fun discussion. I hope that you'll put your comments in there if it was something that you learned or a part that stuck out to you, or even a question that you're like clarification on something. I'd love to see that and love to hear it. As always, click subscribe or click the like button if you enjoyed it. And have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you guys later.
See ya.